It's not your fault.
Don't fuck with me, all right? Don't fuck with me, Sean, not you.
It's not your fault. It's not your fault.
After my last video, many of you were asking, how do you feel about being benched, dude? You're on the bench now, you fucking suck. And during my casting, I also mocked some people for being on the bench, but it has raised some questions. What do you do when you're on the bench? For many people, being benched during raiding is like the worst day of your WoW life. Like, what the fuck does this even mean? Why am I here? Why did I grind out AP for months and months and months? Now, I'm fully aware of the reason I'm benched right now for Jaina Proudmoore, and as you can see, I did get in for Stonewall Blockade, so I didn't miss out on every piece of progression, or decent progression, is that it's just the end of the world, right? You've put in all this preparation. You've prepared multiple characters, certainly if you're in the high-end mythic scene, or if you're moving into that world, which we'll get to in a minute, is you're all ready. You've farmed AP. You've got the necklace requirements the guild asks for. You've been to every farm raid. You've got as much gear as you can, the same as everybody else. And then those mythic comps are made. Week 1, you're going inside, and you're in Group 5. Motherfucker. Motherfucker. It's the worst day of your life. I said before, like, I have a kind of unique reason I'm benched now. And it's all fair, so let's talk about that for a start. It is completely ridiculous for me to expect to walk back into a raid after being away for some of the progression, like an entire progression week. It's moronic, because while I was away, people took my place. They deserved to be there. They also have way more gear. They had a full week of getting gear and stuff like that. I would be the complete arsehole if I turned up and was like, well, where's my raid spot, right? That's not going to happen. Luckily, Stonewall Blockade did require a lot of range, so I managed to get in on that. And then when it got to Jaina, I was out, and all I said is, understand, totally fine. But it would be foolish to also presume that before this point, I've never been benched. Some people, because obviously you know me mostly from YouTube and making guides for like every class in the game, would assume for some reason that I started like at the top. No, not at all. Like, I try and make a clear point that I was a total noob for quite some time, right? I was a total noob for quite some time. For like all of vanilla, I was terrible. I didn't know it. I had no idea because all my friends thought I was good, but I was terrible. And then over the Burning Crusade was when I started to go, oh, okay, I'm crap at this game. There's way more to learn and moving up through there. But more importantly, not only have I been benched at some point, I've also benched people as well, because this message goes out to raid leaders. What is the number one cause of frustration when it comes to either for being benched? When you get into that mythic comp and it's not normal and heroic anymore, we have flex now. That's a whole different reason if you're getting benched and like the raid's not full. That's weird. But in Mythic, when it comes to being benched, what's the number one reason people get really frustrated, angry? And as people suggest to me, like, would you change guild and all that kind of stuff? Pussy-ass raid leaders. Pussy-ass raid leaders are the absolute number one cause of all frustration. They're the worst. Real soft-ass, cowardly raid leaders. If you're going to take on the role of raid leader, right, that also comes with responsibility of explaining the bad shit. You can't avoid that. And countless stories we've had, certainly via Drama Time, are about people just not understanding what's going on because their raid leader won't respond to them. They won't answer any questions. And they're just having things put in front of them, like being benched, or they're being told that they're not going to be in sometime, or something like that, or they're not going to be part of the raid team, and then they go, why? And they're just getting sort of like half-assed answers. Even now, in the guild I'm in, when it came to Mythic Week and the first comps were made, the raid leader gave a reason why. It's like, if you're on the bench, here's why. We're just looking at either, certainly at our level, it was like, it's just the comp setup, you understand that. Or sometimes it's just, your class fucking sucks. That happens. It's really unfortunate. It's really unfortunate, but we can't predict how the raid design is going to go. We do our best, but Blizzard ultimately designs how the raid's going to go. And if you're pushing really early content, some classes are just naturally better at certain fights than others. And again, Blockade's a great example. It just really favors having a lot of ranged players there. Some melee who are definitely deserving of a spot being there because he's contributed a great deal isn't there. He's on the bench. Some players are playing different specs than their mains. Why? It's just the way the game goes, unfortunately. It's a shitty situation to be in. It is. But you should also accept and understand why that is. If you don't, the game isn't going to change around you. It's not. It happens to every spec, every class at some point or another, either because their DPS is generally low, their utility they're bringing is generally low, or the fight really favors certain styles of play. Blizzard should do better. No one's denying that. But we face reality. We could bring in this really great player. It's going to be a bad idea for the raid. It's going to be a really bad idea. When this fight's on farm, no problem. No problem. But for the first kill, every advantage we get is a benefit. It's an absolute benefit. And I would like to believe that most Mythic Raiders understand that. Most Mythic Raiders understand that. Certainly if you've gone through a couple of tiers, you've seen some good players who have been like, and often, and this is the interesting thing, this is a really interesting thing. Often players will ask to bench themselves. And that's because they understand that it's a guild effort. What we're doing here is teamwork based. So another reason that a lot of people get benched and struggle to cope with it, certainly if their raid leader's not explaining it, is if you haven't had it explained to you why you're benched, you can often look into the raid, and I've done this, and I've been there, and I'm sure many of you can relate to this, is you'll look in the raid, and you'll see that guy, right? That guy who plays the same spec as you, same class, about the same gear, but you're pretty sure he's like into furries and he's like whacking it to hentai mid-raid. He seems to AFK a lot. Your damage is always higher. Why the fuck is that guy in the raid and I'm not? And your raid leader's not said anything, or not said anything truthful, because a lot of cowardly raid leaders will just lie. Like, oh, we're going to alternate people in and out and all this kind of shit, and you never get alternated in. Yeah, I've seen that happen too many times. But you're looking at this guy and you're like, what the fuck, man? Like, what the hell's going on here? Like, why am I outside the raid and this guy's in the raid? I mean, I put in more effort, right? I mean, I'm always performing better than him. Huge amount of reason this could happen. And again, it's trying to find out the right answers. I've had to bench people who definitely, certainly on farm, did way more damage than another guy, but I've brought another guy in. Why did I do that? That guy is a much better progression raider. This is a really difficult thing for a lot of people to get, and it's difficult, especially now in modern WoW, where many players who are coming into the Mythic scene have kind of grown up in a way, or been brought into the game in the Pug world. The Pug world is just so bad. It's unbelievably bad for anybody who wants to do well at the game and starts learning more about the game. So what's the difference between a good progression raider and a great farm raider? So I consider myself to be the opposite. Some people might disagree, but this is how I can see myself, is I'm a really good progression raider. I like being put in situations that we don't exactly understand what's happening. I like being in scenarios that aren't fully predictable and repeated, so we can adapt and do things on the fly. I love that. Farm raiding, I don't enjoy at all. Like, it's just rinse and repeat for me, and I kind of drift out. I lose interest. So farm raiding, I'm not the guy to be. The vice versa of that is a lot of people who definitely have come from the Pug world, where their DPS has been a number one factor, their item level has been the defining factor about them. And they're great on farm raiding because they will do tremendous amounts of damage. They will be maximum focusing. They'll be focusing on getting high on the damage meter, high on logs. They'll be looking at all-star points. They'll be looking at those kind of things. You put them in a progression raid and they do all kinds of shit that you really do not want to happen in a progression raid. And that'll be things like when raid leaders, a really simple example would be the raid leader calls for a stop on DPS. If this is your mentality when you hear the raid leader call for stopping on DPS, well, I actually had a really good pull. My damage is really high right now, and everybody else is going to stop, and this thing does need to die, so I can squeeze out a little bit more damage here. You're out. You're on the bench, dude. Like, as soon as possible, you're on the fucking bench. If we can afford to bench you, you're on the bench for when it comes to, like, a really difficult fight, because coming from a raid leader and guildmaster perspective that I did for many years, I do not want you in the raid. I do want you in on farm because you're going to, like, always do a huge amount of damage and kill the boss quickly so we can move on to the next, collect items, and go home. When it comes to progression, where we have to adapt, where things aren't going well, then we really need you to stop. So we can look at fights like Opulence and, again, Stonewall Blockade. We can look at fights like that and just be where we have to manage and balance things from two totally separate groups, which is a really great element of Battle for Dazara lore, is, you know, we need to rely on the fact that Group 1 needs to stop for a bit. Group 2 needs to push a little bit harder. That way we can have this nice transition to a boss we haven't killed yet in order to make sure we all win and succeed and do well. That's the idea. if we have players in there who are a little bit horny, a little bit hungry, really care about doing well, or think it matters in a way. So some players still become obsessed with, like, what's the damage meter after a wipe, right? So it's a bit of a meme in a lot of guilds, is like people linking damage meters after a wipe to say how well they did. And it's like, this doesn't add up. Like, a good raid leader will go, yeah, you might have out DPS'd, blah, blah, blah. You might have out DPS'd Timmy, but Timmy got, like, CC'd, like, 4 times. Timmy was also dealing with doing a platform, or we had Timmy doing some extra jobs, which obviously take away from his just raw DPS time. The damage meter doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You can look at it and see your name in lights, but that's not what we want in a progression raid. You're on the bench. Get on the bench, man. Just get on the fucking bench. When we're farm raiding, sure, we'll have you back. And your raid leader should communicate that back to you. It's like, well, we've seen some elements during our raiding where you're not quite following raid rules. And we think you're being a little bit selfish in what you're doing. We need to clear that up, and we're definitely going to get you back in. But these are concerns we have. Like, if we're calling for you to stop, if we're calling for... let's say you're a warrior and we're calling for rallying cry, and it's taking you a little bit longer because you're finishing the cast. Perhaps you die every now and again to mechanics that you need to move out of, and it's because you're finishing that caster, that spell. You're doing that, you're under cooldowns, and therefore you don't want to drop them. You don't like stopping DPS if you're doing various things. I mean, we've had that scenario so much, certainly Battle for Dazar'alor, where often we are called to stop DPS, or we have to go and res somebody, or people need innovates and things like that, and it's a little awkward to get to them. These kind of things happen all the time, and you need to be Johnny on the spot, because guess what? Let's talk about innovate. Innovate's a really good one, so I'm playing balance at the moment. Innovate's a great one. When healers call for innovate, they're calling for it because they want it right fucking now, right? And if you're the guy, let's just compare to you guys. If you're the guy who's like, well, let's do a balance thing. If you're under incarnation or something, which is a massive cooldown every 3 minutes. If you're under the effects of incarnation, you're like, well, I don't really want to stop DPSing here during incarnation, because that's really going to scuff my damage for like a second and a half, right? To look over to my raid frames, find out who called for the innovate, then throw the innovate over to them. I don't want that distraction right now, but I'll give you that innovate as soon as I'm ready, and it might only be 5 or 6 seconds from now. You compare that to the guy who's like, I need innovate, and they have innovate. Who do you think the healers want in that raid? It's really that easy. And these are good ideas as to why you've been benched. Now, some of you have got to point out to the obvious one is like, what if it's because I suck? Yeah, that happens. That really happens. Certainly if you get to Mythic, it's like, what if I'm just not performing well? Okay, this is difficult. One, you should know you're not performing well and be ready to admit it and try to correct it in some way. If you're having a bad raid night, and we all have bad raid nights, happens. If you have a bad raid night where you're like, I know I'm better than this, I should not be dying to these things, and your raid leader's like, what's going on? Or even just like, okay, we're going to swap you out now, right? Okay, so some of you will have seen that happen to some people, or it's happened to yourself. What do you do with that? Because you can either go one of two ways, depending on your personality on this one. Some people will react like they did when I said I was benched. It's like, well, I just leave guild because I'm not going to do all the preparation. I'm not going to get all the gear and then not raid. Like, fuck that. And there's an element of that which is true. If you believe, and you've never had, again, this comes back to feedback, right? If you've never had any cause to believe why you're not in the raid and they are using a number of your classes, and perhaps you've even seen something even crazier, which does happen, is somebody else has main swapped to your class and spec, lesser geared, not the one that they were planning to use as a main raider, and they've got the spot over you. And you're not finding out that it's because they just don't think you're very good, and you're not aware that you're very good. That's tricky, because you've not had any feedback to point you in that direction. I played all of vanilla thinking I was great, until I met somebody who was like, okay, you were doing a lot of things wrong. And that's what it took. It was like, I was surrounded by players who were just way better than me, who weren't shitty to me. Weren't shitty to me at all, but gave me that knowledge, right? They gave me that knowledge. They were like, okay, you're doing a lot of things wrong here. Try this, this, and this, and adapt to this. So you're either going to go the other way, which is like, I'm out. I'm fucking done, right? I am not going to sit here on the fucking bench. I'm not going to be made out to be an arsehole or anything like that. And I think I'm great because no one's ever told me otherwise. And therefore, I'm going to move guild. And you end up in a spiral is what happens there. I've seen players come and go from every single guild I've been in over the course of World of Warcraft who come in, they have great logs to show. Again, that idea of the farm raid, right? They have really good logs to show. They get in there and they're just like not very good. As simple as that. They're just not very good. And we're like, oh, that's nasty. Like, you know, he occasionally forgets he's even got debuffs. He's not putting them in the right place. This is kind of spicy. Like, this guy's not going to hang out. And then suddenly, poof, he's back on the bench again, looking for a new guild. Happens all the time. It really does happen all the time. And it's hopefully they encounter a guild which is like, okay, you're making mistakes. You're making a lot of mistakes. We need you to clean those up. Some players don't, which is kind of sad. Some players just don't. Even if you give them a weak aura or whatever that like spams their face that you have this debuff, they still fuck it up for some reason. And I don't know what that is. I've tried to counter it a lot of times, but they still make this mistake, or they're still not clear on what they're supposed to do with it, and they're too afraid to ask, which is a nightmare. Please ask all the time if you're not sure. So what I can say to you is I logged on. Let me just give you my example. I logged on to the raid when I got home on Sunday, and I expected to be on the bench, but I was outside the raid. The call went out to whisper for him, so I joined the raid, which is what everybody does, whether you're benched or not. You all join the raid, and you never know. Somebody might not have shown up. You never know what's going to happen here. So I got in the raid, and then I was in the group, so I asked straight away. I was like, boom, am I in the raid tonight? And they're like, yeah, come in for Stormwall. We could use you for now. We might swap you out later on. Cool, fine, awesome. Got in the raid, and they'd obviously had some pulls, so what's the first thing I ask? A lot of questions. Got stuck on a boat. What are we doing here? Someone explain to me what you figured out first time. Where are we going with here and here? All right, I'm going to take a few pulls to try and get used to it. Figure out what's going on. Because obviously if you walk into a progression raid that you've been benched for, you're behind massively on experience and comfortability, all those things. Ask a lot of questions. And then later on, you're fine. You've mixed into the crowd. You're going to be okay. If you have the mentality that if someone says you need to improve your performance and you go, okay, I'm going to improve my performance, I'm going to do that. If you do that, you're going to be miles better off. You're going to be miles better off. And the guild will also stick around. Because believe me, when a raid leader who is honest, who isn't a cowardly, actually says to you like, well, these are the problems you're having. We don't really want to risk that unnecessarily. If you work on those, we like you as a person. And we're going to get to this in a minute. If you like you as a person, you know, we want you here, but you're making a lot of shitty errors and you're dying unnecessarily or whatever it is. Or if we give you something to do, then you just disappear off the map in terms of your damage, your tanking, your healing. We need people that we can obviously give jobs to because, you know, this raiding is way more difficult now than it ever has been. And we need to throw jobs at people. That's how the game works. So if those are the things you need to work on, you go away, you consult, you look, you learn, and you practice, and you try and get better and better and better. High Mythic Plus keys is a great way to do that, by the way, if that's the problem you're having. Try and get as high keys as possible. Loads of stuff that just massacres you in those dungeons. The final thing we're going to talk about is we've focused a lot on gameplay, right? You might suck. It's just a matter of you not adapting properly on the fly. You're not reliable when things are going wrong. Things like that might lead you to being benched. But there is another reason that's not gameplay related. It kind of comes back to what I was saying before. I always do better than this other guy who's playing the same class as me, the same spec as me, and I'm always performing better. And I know I'm a good progression raider. Or I think I am. It can be, and this is a tricky one, it can be just a personality thing. And this is a little difficult, but it's becoming more common, and in fact, guilds are adapting to this. So if you have been brought up in sort of the pug world, where it's been a very selfish, it's all about me, I'm after the loot drops for myself, this is the item I want, and you've cared about your damage and your item level and things like that. The game flips entirely when you get to a situation, which is usually mythic raiding, where you might end up on the bench, right? And it's really hard to welcome those guys into the group because you're moving from an entirely self-centered base, which isn't your fault, and guilds understand that, right? So that's something you need to be clear of. Is more and more guilds are becoming aware of this problem and are trying to work through it. So you're taking a guy who has 100% throughout his life, who's been in a guild since the moment he made a character, has been taught that everything is about you. And it's a problem I often see in people asking about heroic guilds, because heroic guilds are still learning how to progression raid, and they're still getting used to it, and they're working on other things like communication, which still happens in Mythic guilds, but they're working on strategies. Sometimes there's weaker players, but you're still bringing them, and you're trying to work around that. All those things are happening, and it becomes a very it can be a very self-entitled is a word there. Self-entitled environment to be in. And then you move to Mythic where it completely flips on its head and you've never experienced anything like it. And now you're in a scenario which is entirely team-based. It's entirely team-based. And even though heroic guilds, I'm not exactly generalizing all heroic guilds here. I want to be clear on that. There are some really great heroic guilds. In the Mythic environment, it changes almost completely. Especially for guilds that are always Mythic. Like Heroic is week 1, maybe week 2. And that's it. After that, it's all Mythic. Those guys are entirely team-based. And they do extraordinary things, certainly with the way World of Warcraft is right now, to get rid of items to other people. Like the levels, and I'm sure you've all seen like the method gearing system. I talked about my guild's gearing system, where we went above and beyond on characters we never intended to use at all in order to funnel gear to other people, not for ourselves. We've spent millions of gold in order to give other people gear, which is obscene by the most gaming standards, but it is the way the game works. And even if it didn't work that way and it went back to Master Looter and things, we would still do the same thing. That's why split runs exist. So we often end up in a scenario now, and it does happen all the way through the game, it's not just in the Mythic world, where you're actively trying to give away loot that you have that is not that good for you. That's the reason. It's like, it's not that good for me, but it's great for him. And what we're doing is so team-based. It's about everybody pulling their weight in order to get this done, because no individual can carry this. No individual or little group of individuals can make this work. It needs every person in that 20-man raid to do their absolute best, and we all look out for each other, because I have to rely on those 19 other people to do their part. And in order for that to happen and to have that trust and to make it work, everyone's got to have each other's backs, and you've got to be like caring about the other people. So what we've had a lot, certainly over the past 12 months and 16 months, when it comes to recruitment across the last 2 guilds I had, is people who are ready to do Mythic. They're certainly capable. Their gameplay is right up there, but their personality and the way they approach the game is so wrong that it has no place in the progression team yet. So you might say, well, if that's the case, Mike, why aren't you just kicking these people, right? Because that's the wrong way to go. It's not their fault. Not their fault at all. It is absolutely not their fault, and maybe no one's told them. Maybe no one's approached them. So during their trial process or whatever it is, you are talking to these guys and you're saying like, okay, you need to switch your thought process here a bit. It's about everybody else, not just you. It's about the the picture. You need to the grand scheme. It's about the big picture, which is the whole team overcoming a challenge. Right? We're all here to overcome a challenge and to do it well and to do it fast and to be the best at what we can do and try your hardest to do that. And we have to do that as a team. If you're very focused on yourself and you're like, well, this is a 0.2% upgrade for me. Yeah, I get that it's 7% for this guy, but it's 0.2 for me. So it's still an upgrade. Like, I don't really want to let this go. Then that's not going to work. And it's certainly not an issue that raid leaders want to deal with in any way. In fact, not even raid leaders, just the guild doesn't want to deal with. We don't want to deal with that attitude in any way, because if I would happily give you that item and I would hope that you would reciprocate back to me, right? That's the mentality. Because I think a lot of people, certainly when the personal loot discussion came up, we're all thinking about it's just me giving away. That was the focus of it. It's just me giving away. All you're talking about is me giving away my things, giving away my stuff. This is mine. And that's that self-centered attitude, right? That's a self-centered attitude. No, the whole purpose is we do this reciprocally. It's backwards and forwards. We do it for everybody else. And guess what? That's repaid back to us. That's how it works. And all of us rise because of this. Every single person rise. It's not about you being this sort of like gifter of all your stuff, right? And I think that's that self-centered attitude kicks in. It's like, wait a minute, what? This is just about me giving away my stuff. No, because that's then repaid back to you. It's not a case of when all the gearing system went in for Battle for Dazar Law that one person leveled all these professions in order to give away all this stuff. Everybody did it. Every single person did it. Even the guys on the bench. Even the guys who knew they couldn't take part in this raid tier, but could certainly help in heroic clears and things like that. Those guys who are 100% aware they are not going to take part in the raid race. And that is happening in my guild right now. There are several players who have said, I can't take part in Mythic Progress, right? Because of other commitments that I have right now. But I will be there for the heroic and I will do everything necessary. And they leveled those professions and they traded away stuff. And they know that's because it works both ways. It works both ways. And hopefully with some explanation and actually seeing it in action, because you'll probably remember the personal loot thing. People were all like taking loot off trials and all this nonsense. Us in the more team-based atmosphere were like, this is crazy. Like, this is not what happens, but it's the mentality that a lot of people believe based on what they're reading of other people who also believe it to be that case. It's like it's just an echo chamber of people thinking they're just losing all their shit all the time, which is madness. Of course, that's not what's happening in any way, shape, or form. It's going both ways all the time, and it's being filtered throughout 20 people, always backwards and forwards, so that everybody rises. And not only do they rise together, but everybody rises optimally. And this is a big thing in World of Warcraft, is you can have a high item level, but it could be all sorts of random nonsense, and your damage will never be as good as a guy who rose himself optimally by trying to optimize everything that was ideal for his character. So I get a haste verse ring, shit for me. That guy's got a crit mastery, that's perfect for me. He needs this one, we're swapping over, right? That's all we're trying to do. And guess what? Both of us rose more, right? Not only did we would have risen by you keeping the items for ourselves. Sure, we would have gone up a little bit, but by swapping and working together as a team, we both rose together still, and we both rose even further, and we did much better. That's why the guilds do splits and things like that. So it can be a personality thing. And again, it comes down to your raid leader explaining that, your officer team explaining that, and letting you know that's what it is. And your mentality should be, okay, do these guys have a point here? This is how you deal with being on the bench. Like, here's what I've been told. One, do I think that's true? Certainly if people are looking at logs and things like that and saying none of this is true, then you would go back to them and say, hang on a minute, these things you're saying don't make any sense. Or being very flimsy with your evidence is also a bit of a negative. So we've had a lot of people who come in and say, well, I traded away this item this one time. I'm a very generous god, right? I'm a very generous god. It's like, no, that doesn't sound right from somebody who's in that world. It's like, it happens all the time. Just because you gave away a piece of gear at some point, which was a minor upgrade for you, and that makes you like really fair. No, this is a constant ongoing process. It also reflects in other ways. So I've spoke a lot about gear here, but it reflects in a lot of other ways for this self-centered thing. And it also comes back to before, like, are you able to adapt and hold cooldowns? Are you able to not go for top of the damage meter or something like that and not care about those things while we're doing these things? These all sort of filter through to a player who maybe you don't want in progression. And that's something you should visit and rethink. Like, certainly if that's what your raid leader's telling you, is like, well, you're not team-based enough yet. We think you might get there. We think you're good enough. That's why you're not being kicked or removed. We want you in the guild as a person, but you need to pick up more of a team-based mentality. And also, it can come down to just personality clashes. Unfortunately, ultimately, and this is when you would consider leaving guild, is you might just not get on with the people there. You might not enjoy it whatsoever. And that's often when people go, like, this isn't a guild for me. You'll usually pick it up pretty quickly once you get on comms whether it's a guild for you. You might be fine, but the other guys don't like you for some reason. That happens. Hopefully you can find out if that's the case. It's like, well, you're causing a lot of problems in the guild. You know, you've had these encounters with people that don't make a lot of sense. Again, it kind of comes back to drama time and the amount of people who aren't sure. It doesn't happen very often, but I have called out a number of people. It's like, I've read through your story and I see your point, but you're wrong. Like, let me explain it from the other side. It's like, this is what appears to be happening to these guys. And that's why you got removed or benched or whatever it might be. So being on the bench is a natural part of being in the upper echelons. And you should want to be there still. Like, I don't like focusing on these negative aspects, but we certainly should talk about them and understand them. And hopefully you guys understand them too. That being on the bench doesn't necessarily mean something horrible. And I think that's so important to understand. Is it doesn't mean you suck. Doesn't mean you have a personality problem or anything like that. The fact of the matter is, it just might not be a spot for you, your class, at this point in time. And you should recognize that before you even brought up. Like, I'm surprised. I mean, I'm surprised I'm in for this, boss. Would be a more positive attitude than hoping to get in knowing that maybe it's beneficial if you're not. A lot of the best officers I've ever found are people who self-bench themselves because they know that their class or whatever, or the specs they have ready just aren't good for what we're doing, and it's better if they're not in the raid. And they understand that. It doesn't happen a lot, but when it does, that's a guy you can respect, right? You can respect this guy going, just because I'm an officer or I'm a veteran or whatever, I understand I'm not supposed to be here. And that's a great aspect to have as well. So I hope that helps with being on the bench and all the different aspects you can have. But try and get off the bench. Do what you can. It's important. Bye-bye.